this afternoon. I appreciate the introduction, Raneem, and did a really nice job with that. I don't have much to add to it. I've been in the field now, for about 15 years, serving at-risk kids in the Kansas community. As Raneem mentioned, I started out working with juvenile offenders, and that was really kind of my bread and butter and what I thought I would go into long term. And then I came across the current agency I work for, Kids TLC, here in Olathe, Kansas, and now I work heavily with an abuse and neglect population. So I definitely want to start by mentioning our organization a little bit and talking a little bit about what we do, because I think it's a nice representation of what it is that we do here and how we serve kids across the community. And that's all really good stuff. So let's jump into that a little bit. At Kids TLC, I work in our residential program that's labeled a PRTF. And that's often a term that is pretty new to some folks. So a PRTF stands for Psychiatric Residential Treatment Facility. And I think right now there's about 8 of them in the state of Kansas. What that means is we're working with kids who are at risk to the point where they're too unsafe to live in their homes. So they're either too unsafe to themselves or too unsafe to others. And so it's kind of the highest level of care you can get in the state of Kansas, rather than like just short of an acute hospital or a juvenile correctional facility or a juvenile detention center. So I lead a team of other behavior analysts and registered behavior technicians that works across all 10 of our dorms. We have about 70 kids ranging from 6 to 18 years old. And we do behavioral therapy with them. So we utilize applied behavior analysis, and we tend to work with those kids that are kind of what we'll call like our heavy hitter kids. So kids that have more aggressive behaviors, more self-injurious behaviors, sexual acting out, things of that nature. And so we get referrals from our therapists to work with some of those kids across our campus. We also are like the skill building team. And so we do a lot in terms of working with our kids to develop social skills, different activities of daily life skills like your hygiene and things of that nature. We do a ton of staff training, primarily in relationship development, how to work with kids that are pretty challenging. And that's kind of what I plan to share with you all today is kind of those relationship development approaches. We also have some other programs that, again, were designed to address the needs in the community across the state of Kansas. So we have a planned respite program that's new, that's contracted through our community mental health partners, where some of our families can get a break from their chaotic homes, and they could have their kids come and stay with us for the weekends, where they're doing fun therapeutic activities, from Friday through Sunday, and kind of get some breaks. We also have our outpatient clinics, which is more traditional cognitive therapy. We do that for all families, marriage counseling, family therapy, individual therapy. We have an intensive outpatient program for kids that are struggling in the communities and in their schools. That kind of looks like an after-school program, and often functions as kind of a bridge for kids that are on the wait list for our residential program, and also for kids who are needing a step down as they exit our residential program and kind of step back into their homes. And then as many of you with a background in behavior analysis may be familiar with, we have our Trellis Center, which is a center-based autism program that employs applied behavior analysis along with occupational therapy and speech language therapy. So love our organization. We've been around for about 50 years and do a lot to serve the community. Today, I want to talk to you about a few of our learning objectives. So I'm going to work with you all to go over some of the prevalence of what at-risk looks like in our Kansas community. So we're specifically going to talk a little bit about foster care, and what those rates look like, along with the various reasons the kids get placed into foster care or removed from their homes. We're going to talk about relationship development. That's going to be the bulk of our presentation today. And we're going to do all this through a kind of a behavioral lens, because that's what my background's in. That won't be the bulk of our conversation today, but we'll kind of keep that in the back of our brains as we move through the presentation. The first few statistics I'm going to show you came from the Department for Children and Families, and what we're looking at here is kind of our foster care numbers so far through fiscal year 2025, and so we're really looking at July through September of 2025. If we jump all the way down to the bottom row of this chart, you'll see the words removals, as exits, and OOH. So removals, we're talking about the number of kids that month that were removed from their homes and placed into foster care. Exits refers to the number of kids that are exiting the foster care system, so presumably re-entering their home or permanent placement. And then OOH refers to outside of home. So that's measured by the last day of the month, how many kids in Kansas are placed outside of their home. And so if you look at that bottom right-hand cell of this chart, you'll see that so far we've got a little over 6,000 kids on average placed outside the home in foster care. And that was a pretty daunting statistic the first time I saw it. That's far more kids residing outside the home than even what I was aware of. This next chart will show kind of trends over the last several years. And so our green bars represent the number of kids that are exiting foster care, while the line shows the number of kids entering foster care. And so over several years, you'll see there was actually more kids entering the system than what we were removing. So that's kind of changed pace since about 2020. But I do want to mention that at least in my profession and working with at-risk kids, since that's kind of our topic for today, those kids are extremely hard to place in foster care. So it's hard to find available homes. Often homes are lacking, or the kids that I work with have such a behavioral history, whether that's aggression in the home or property destruction, sexual misconduct, that it's very hard to find foster families that are willing to take some of those kids. And so oftentimes when it comes to kids in foster care, we may be discharging kids to one-night placements or emergency placements. They may spend some time in offices, and so sometimes we'll have kids come and stay with us on more than one occasion, and we may learn that they were away from us for a year, and in that amount of time they might have had 30 different placements. So that's a really sad reality of what some of our kids deal with when they are moving through the system. This next chart, if you look at the second column, gives us all the various reasons why kids are removed from their home in the state. And then the far column will break each of those reasons down into percentages. And so really the takeaway here is the primary reason that our kids are being removed from their homes is physical abuse in the home. So that accounted for about 20%. Caregivers' inability to cope or take care of their kids, that's about 15%. Lack of supervision in the home accounts for about 14%, and then physical neglect about 10%. So those really are the primary reasons why our kids sometimes end up in foster care. The final statistic I'll show you has to do with juvenile offenses and juvenile arrests. So the most recent data I was able to find comes to us from 2021 from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. And each of these rows shows the various juvenile charges that some of our kids can be picked up for. And then that bottom right cell shows you the total number of arrests for juveniles that year. And so in terms of juvenile offenses, we're looking at just short of 5,000 arrests that occurred in 2021. The majority are for things that I think a lot of us would associate with teenagers or juvenile offenses, such as battery charges, so just standard battery charges, drug offenses, criminal damage to property. Those tend to make up the bulk of our arrests in Kansas. As we move forward in a presentation, we're going to talk about, various family factors and youth factors that create these kind of at-risk situations. But I'd like to start by talking about some specific components of healthy families that lead to positive outcomes, and we'll kind of shine a light on the absence of some of these factors as we move through our presentation. So families that show a lot of appreciation, and that's consistently shown across all members of the family, that's a big protective factor. Spending time together, so families that eat meals together, they're playing games or having movie nights, that's all good things. And in my line of work, we think, the more time that families are spending together, that decreases the probability that kids are out doing inappropriate things or illegal behaviors. And so, again, that's a really big protective factor for us. Having communication through all parties and handling crises thoughtfully and patiently. Even in a perfect family, we're going to have issues and crises, right? And so are we reacting to those crises in a way where we're explosive and we're reactive and we're yelling and screaming, or are we able to remain patient and calm and think through those things as a family and manage those crises in a thoughtful, strategic way? And so that's important as well. And then the last bullet I'll talk about on this slide is showing unconditional love that's not tied to a child's performance. And I think that's a really important one. So we'll talk frequently about the need for structure and discipline and teaching, and all that's important. And we're going to tie some of our kids' privileges to their performance. So, if you get detention, you might lose some privileges at home. But what we want to be mindful of is that, that our statements of love and affection towards our kids, that's not tied to their performance, right? That's shown unconditionally throughout. So that's definitely important as well. Our families across the state, they really need our support. And so when we're looking at adolescents and teenagers, our kids are exposed to so much more information than they've ever been exposed to before. Really, that comes with the advancement of the internet and social media. And so we have to be thinking about, where do we want our kids getting their information from? And oftentimes kids think that, anything they see on the internet is factual and true. And so we want to make sure that they're getting that information from us, and that we're having open dialogues with our kids to ensure that that the information they're receiving is factual. The maturity level of our kids, we're not able to keep up with the information that they're exposed to. And so oftentimes they don't yet have the developmental or cognitive or emotional processes necessary to take in that information and consume it in a productive way. And so we really need to offer support again and have honest conversations, not only about the issues that they're facing, but being mindful about the information that they're receiving and what is the source of that information. I'm not sure how much of you remember what it's like to be an adolescent, but as you know, it could be an incredibly stressful period of time for just a variety of reasons. As a society, we haven't truly defined what we expect adolescents to be. I think there's a lot of times that we treat them very much like adults, and we expect them to behave in a way that is how an adult would behave. And then there's other times that we very much treat them like children. And so we often send these kids mixed messages regarding how we want them to behave at various times. They're also going through radical physical and physiological changes. And so, they're growing up and they're also taking in a lot of information, and their brains are still developing chemically, and they're trying to decide kind of what the best way is to express their emotions. In the teenage years, that's oftentimes when mental illness can first present itself. And so they may begin to experience some of those early signs of mental illness, and they can be really confused as to what it is that's going on with them, and why they're feeling certain ways. And so that can all be really challenging and confusing. Academic tests definitely get harder as you get older, right? And so coming out of elementary school, middle and high school is much harder, and those academic requirements are becoming much more serious. Grades are beginning to count. Testing becomes more stressful, things of that nature. A big one along the lines of school too is that they're now being faced with new social situations. And so not only is school getting harder, but now you're moving into new friend groups where maybe you have friends of the opposite sex or friends of different age groups. And so all of those interactions can cause more stress. And I think if you don't yet have the skills to navigate different social situations, those stressful situations can certainly take a toll. This is often where we'll start experiencing bullying, whether that's, physical or emotional or even cyberbullying. And so these are all conflicts that are happening simultaneously, that our adolescents have to experience. They're also experiencing family conflicts in the home. A lot of our families end up in divorce, and our kids may have to deal with the repercussions of that. They also may be experiencing things in the home like homelessness or food insecurity, might have basic conflicts that every family has around household chores and general rule following and academic requirements. And so they're managing those frustrations as well. And then they're dealing with the conflict between their inner urges and what society expects of them. And so when you're an adolescent, that's often the time in your life where you're beginning to develop your moral compass and your own kind of moral code. And our kids are beginning to define for themselves what they want to do socially or morally. And that often comes in direct conflict with maybe what our families or society's expectations are of those kids. So what are some of the things that stress depends on, and what are some of those factors that lead to more or less stress in our kids? So the way that we state demands can play one factor into that stress level. So what are the demands for the kids, and are they clearly stated what our expectations are? Are they being presented them into a consistent manner? Or do we change our demands and expectations based on our mood that day? And so that can produce a lot of stress for our kids. Competencies of our youth. We're going to talk a lot about this one today. So, skill absolutely matters. And if you are studied and you're prepared for a test and you know how you're going to do, that's going to be far less stressful than if you don't study at all. You don't have the knowledge, you're not ready for it. Same thing with our kids. So if we're doing our jobs and teaching them skills necessary to be successful, whether that's socially or academically or whatever, the more we equip them with competence to face those situations, the more we're doing in terms of reducing their stress and preparing them for those situations. What are our kids' attitudes towards the restrictions that we're putting in place? This is a really basic and normal one. No matter what we do, we're going to be setting rules and putting limits in place for our kids. And that's great, but our kids are going to have various attitudes towards those restrictions. And so are we doing a lot in terms of providing rationales and letting them know why we're coming up with these rules and kind of what the best interest is, and do they have a say in some of that rule setting, and do they have kind of a voice in that setting? along the same lines, what are the kids' interests, and are we doing anything to recognize and meet those interests? And so this is certainly something where we don't want to come across as a dictator. The more we can set rules and expectations that are also in line with our kids' interests, definitely makes them feel valued and heard. And then what are the histories of our kids? The kids that I work with, I get them for a very short amount of time in comparison to the lifespan leading up into the time I get them. And so what does that history look like? And that's in the home, whether that's experiencing abuse and neglect, which can have physical damage to the brain and kind of their development, kind of stunt their development. But it can go even further back than that to their prenatal history. So whether they're exposed to drugs and alcohol while their parents or while their mom's pregnant with them. So really, what is the history of our kids and what have they gone through, and how does that impact where they are now in society? So things that we can do to help mitigate some of those challenges is we can be consistent in the standards that we're setting for our kids. And when we are setting standards, are we offering viable alternatives? So meaning, do we just teach our kids what not to do? Or do we also identify other skills that they can do instead, or other activities that they can do instead, and teach that viable alternative?
Um,
Developing relation. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just I wanted to hop in with a question from the chat.
Of
Um,
course.
she was just asking if it's true the brain isn't fully developed till 25.
I don't know the exact number on that, but that is true. So your brain continues to develop well past 21, and 25, I believe, is correct. So I'll share my experience working with kids who have that abuse and neglect background. You can see the impact of that abuse and neglect on the brain through like neuroscanning. It's really, really interesting. And so we may work with kids in their teenage years that are still sucking their thumbs and things like that, showing behaviors that are really not age appropriate. And it's due to stunted development through physical abuse or neglect. And so you're right. I think a healthy brain is not done developing until 25 years old, but that doesn't even account for brains that kind of have been stunted and have some of that developmental trauma. So that all that can definitely have an impact as well. Are there any other questions kind of while we're paused for a second? We'll keep moving along. We'll also talk a little bit about developing personal relationships with kids. That one seems like an obvious one, but I think it's not as intuitive as some might think. We want to keep avenues of communication open. So along with that relationship development piece, the more comfortable our kids are approaching us about any issue, we certainly don't want them to be keeping things to themselves that are dangerous or can really impact their health and well-being. Teaching skills, social skills, we'll talk a lot about throughout our presentation, but again, just improving their competence so that they're equipped to kind of take on the world. Just some different things that can be problematic in the homes that our families are often facing. So really loud noises, like things being thrown and broken and yelling. Like imagine trying to get sleep and go to school when you're in that environment, sleeping on the floors, things of that nature. Inconsistent rules. And so sometimes the families I work with, rules will be set kind of based on the mood that day. And so sometimes I'm in a good mood, and so curfew extensions are okay. The next day you don't meet that curfew, and now I'm mad because I'm in a different mood. And so that really creates this kind of sense of unpredictability where the kids don't know how to behave at any given time. Physical, mental, emotional abuse obviously is terrible. Lack of boundaries outside the family, so adults or other children coming and going kind of at all hours. Lack of supervision, poverty or financial instability, homelessness, and then if our kids are feeling little signs of recognition. Some things that we can be looking out for as parents and adults and caregivers, is these are some warning signs that I think it's time to intervene with our kids if we start to notice some of these things. So extreme weight loss or weight gain, outside of just normal fluctuations. They're suddenly withdrawing from our family. If you're seeing a dramatic difference in their schoolwork, if they don't have much energy, if they're acting really lethargic for extended periods of time, that can be a sign of depression. Showing apathy or serious rebellious behaviors or illegal behaviors, showing bloodshot eyes, could be allergies, but if it's something that happens routinely, it could be an early sign of drug use. Unreasonable weeping or laughter, talks of suicide, showing a revealing dress more so than what's kind of norm, inappropriate touching or seeking affections, or kind of the opposite of cringing when somebody reaches out to touch. That can be kind of a warning sign that some physical abuse has maybe occurred. Some things that can serve as protective factors for our kids and things that tend to lead to positive outcomes. Some individual characteristics can be things like having a really resilient temperament. And by that, I mean kids who have developed really healthy social skills and problem solving skills. Those kids are much more self-sufficient and able to take on the challenges of society in a healthy way, showing a positive temperament or disposition. And so if we're working with our kids on kind of shaping their worldview such that they're kind of glass half full kids rather than glass half empty, those tend to be good protective factors and indicative of positive outcomes. And intelligence can serve as a protective factor. So kids that score higher on intelligence testing seem to be more equipped for kind of positive outcomes. A big one, and one I really want to highlight today, is having positive pro-social relationships with caring family members or adults. Hopefully that's parents and guardians, right? But in my line of work, those people aren't always in the picture. And so we really try to train our staff, who we call care facilitators, to be mentors and to be positive pro-social adults in kids' lives. The research shows that the more adults that you have in your life that are positive and caring and good role models, the stronger of a protective factor that is. And so you really want to surround your kids with a community of healthy, caring adults. Having a supportive family environment clearly is indicative of positive outcomes. And then setting clear standards that are surrounded by a healthy system of beliefs. And so structuring a nice environment in your home where there's clear expectations surrounding what behavior is expected. Consequences are consistent and reasonable. We're not using excessive forms of punishment, but we're also showing a lot of recognition for what I'll call skillful performance. So when our kids are doing well in school, or if they're making new friends, or anything positive, we're taking the time to recognize that and comment on that behavior. So we definitely want to notice the good stuff is kind of what we talk about here at KISS TLC. What are some things that we can do that serve somewhat as some of those protective processes? So a big one is programming opportunities for involvement. So we can do our kids a real disservice if we kind of send them to school and call it good. And with that, we're missing a lot of opportunities for other engagement. So, clubs and sports are big ones, but really any kind of gathering that is social, teaching our kids social skills improves their relationships with other adults and other kids, keeps them out of trouble, and also can teach them appropriate skills, whether that's sporting events or clubs or activities. We want to support their social and cognitive skills. So we want to take it full opportunity to teach them skills throughout their lives. And again, we want to be we want to be able to recognize any skillful performance that they show. We'll take a moment now to talk more about the behavioral model. So I'm not sure with our audience how many are familiar with applied behavioral analysis, but that's my background. And that's the lens that I tend to view my work through. And so with the behavioral model, we're really looking at primarily the environment. And our belief is that behavior, whether that's appropriate behavior or inappropriate behavior, that's often learned, maintained, and controlled all through environmental influences. And that may seem kind of simplistic, but it's really not. We have a sense that behavior comes from really primarily three driving principles. So the first being biological or genetic factors. So again, that can come through the way you develop. We're all kind of wired differently. We have different levels of brain functioning. We have different dopamine levels. And so as research and technology continues to advance, we just keep learning more and more about the impact that biology and our genetics has on our behavior. We also take into account the long-term learning history of our kids. And so that really comes down to maybe the home environment or maybe the school environment. So all of the different learning opportunities that have taken place over the several years that they've been alive prior to us getting them, prior to their teenage years. And then there's certain things that can really damage that learning and that development. And so when we're looking at things in the physical environment like abuse or something of that nature, that can have physiological effects like higher risk of stroke or heart attack of kids that have been abused during adolescence. And kids have been exposed to varying degrees of punishment, sometimes corporal punishment. And so their outlook on the world and how they view their relationships, all of those things can be influenced through their long-term learning history. The third and final reason that influence that we look at through the behavioral model when it comes to behavior is the immediate behavioral conditions occurring in the environment right at that second. And I think as a behavior analyst, that's often what we're looking directly at, and it's usually what we're trying to manipulate. And so for that, we're looking at specifically what's going on in the environment immediately before the behavior takes place. What's that behavior look like itself? What's the magnitude? What's the duration, severity, things of that nature? And then what are the consequences? And so what does the kid get out of this? And that could either be a good or a bad thing, depending on the circumstances. We also look at setting events at those exact moments. And so some things going on within the kids that can influence behavior at any given moment is if they're hungry, if they have a headache, what's their emotional state that day? Are they angry, or are certain non-preferred teachers present in the environment? And so again, the focus throughout is on concrete observable behaviors, and that's often our focus. And with that behavioral model, what we do is we use that in terms of counseling and trying to teach new skills or behaviors. And we're often trying to identify consequences that we call reinforcement to provide for kids to try to increase appropriate behaviors over time. Let's shift gears now and kind of take the rest of our time together to talk specifically about relationship development. We're going to talk about why it's important and specifically how you do it. One of my favorite reasons is the kids are going to be more likely to talk to you when you've developed a relationship with them. That's important for me for a variety of reasons, but specifically, we work with kids with abuse and neglect backgrounds, and they often don't want to talk about that, and oftentimes they'll keep that information secret or private. And so, the better our relationship with the kids, we can sometimes create these situations where kids will share information with us that they have never felt comfortable sharing with anybody, and that allows us to help them get some treatment, but also we can help get kids out of dangerous situations that they've maybe been in for quite some time. And all of that is through the power of relationship development. So that I think is one of the really cool first reasons why we do it. Secondly, they'll be more affected by our social feedback. When I think of this PowerPoint bullet, I often think of my mom, and so I'm thinking about if I'm being told to do something by my mom, am I more likely to do that thing versus if somebody on the street that I didn't know asked me to do the same thing? Well, the person on the street I'm probably going to ignore, but if my mom tells me to do it, I'm going to do it every time. The reason for that is I have a relationship with her. I want to please her. I don't want to let her down, right? And so I'm definitely more affected by her social feedback. They're going to be more likely to respect us and want to enjoy being around us, and they're going to be eager to please us. All those things create better opportunities for learning to take place. Um, as I just mentioned, yeah, we're going to be more effective teachers. The more we know our kids, the better we're going to be able to address their individual needs. And so, if I have a good relationship with a child, I'm going to know where their deficits are, and I'm going to start there when it comes to trying to build skills and teach them things that they need to know. I'm also going to know what their favorite things are. And so, as I try to teach and try to shape new behaviors, I'm going to introduce kind of their favorite items and activities into that mix. And then, whether we know it or not, we're going to be modeling skills. The more we have relationships with kids, they're going to want to look up to us, and they're going to want to be like we are. And so, if I know what the kids' needs are, I could adjust my behavior to model those things as well, because I know our kids are always watching us and they want to be kind of just like we are. When we are developing relationships specifically on the topic of kind of those at-risk youth, you might initially run into some roadblocks. So we're working with kids who have histories of not trusting adults. Some of their interactions, or a lot of their interactions, may have been overly punitive. They may have had negative interactions with law enforcement or abusive relationships within their home. So they're often not quick to trust and kind of be your best friend. So things that we may start seeing when we're working with some of these kiddos is some casing or some limit testing responses. So they're trying to kind of take in the situation slowly, learn what we're all about. They may engage in some dangerous behavior or aggression or verbal attacks. Kind of see if you're in it. Are you somebody that's going to endure that behavior and still be there, or are they going to be able to push you away, kind of like other adults in their lives? So those are some things we see initially in the beginning when we're trying to develop relationships, and it's our goal to kind of continue pressing through that. You may see our kids withdraw a little bit. Maybe they just kind of don't give you the time of day. They try to stay away from you a little bit. This feeling here is maybe I really like this person, but I don't want to get too close and I might get hurt. They may engage in some verbal attacks towards you or some verbal aggression, or they may camouflage their interests. And so sometimes in the work I'm doing, they may camouflage their true goals and not be totally forthcoming with what it is that they're hoping to get out of certain situations. So some different actions that we can do in terms of developing positive relationships with kids. These are a lot are going to sound like common sense, but I think they're worth talking about. So identifying what their likes and their dislikes are, getting to know the various issues that they may be facing, and asking them a lot of questions. I think our parents ought to know who their kids are friends with. We ought to know if we're um, working with the families, what's the family like, and how's our kid getting along in school. We could find their favorite activities and begin to do those things together. My favorite one on this list I want to talk about is advocating for the child, and I love this one when working with the population that I work with, because a lot of kids display so many problem behaviors that that's all the adults see. And we have a really hard time recognizing that 95% of the time our kids doing well, because the 5% is alarming and it's scary and it's kind of in your face. And so the kids begin to get labeled by that 5%, even though they're doing what they're supposed to be doing 95% of the time. And so I really like to kind of flip that narrative and comment on the things that the kids are doing well. And if you can advocate for the child, both kind of privately and publicly, where we're not trying to pick battles with other professionals like teachers and things, but we're publicly stating that we think this is a good kid. We see the progress they're making. We see the successful things they're doing. And when we can make those statements in front of the child, that's a brand new experience for them, and something that goes miles and miles in terms of relationship development and letting that child know that you care about them. So I really love that one. And then the last one on this slide we'll talk about is giving our kids choices. So again, we don't want to come across as a dictator. We want to be able to give choices to our kids. So we want to be skillful in the way we provide choices, such that any choice our child makes is an appropriate one. But really, we want to give our kids ownership in their lives and feel a sense of autonomy. But we want to offer them choices that are healthy, and allows them to have some control and ownership in their lives. Things that we can do, and again, this is under the behavioral model, right? So these are some behaviors we can do both verbally and non-verbally that allow our kids to know that we care and we're developing positive relationships. So tone of voice is a big one for our verbal behaviors. So many people don't know how their tone is coming across. And when we're training staff, so often our staff say the exact right words, but their tone of voice is just a little sharp or a little programmed, right? And so we will actually encourage people to record their voice at times and play it back so they can see kind of how they're coming across. So we definitely want a nice positive voice tone. Self-disclosure is one that's commonly used in relationship development. That's kind of a tricky one, because I think it's really good and helpful to share personal stories with our kids when we're trying to counsel them through challenges that they have in their lives. And I think that can be a really powerful tool when it comes to relationship development. We just want to be really careful that those stories are appropriate and we're not sharing stories about illegal behavior or anything inappropriate that we may have done in our past. We want to make empathetic and sympathetic statements to the kids, letting them know that what they're going through is hard, and we're here to support, but that they're going through some really challenging times. We want to refrain from making any judgmental statements. And so again, we want 90 to 95% of our statements to be really, really positive. There's going to be times where we're going to have to give corrective feedback to our kids. And so that's really effective and easy to consume if the vast majority of our feedback is overly positive. Some of the nonverbal behaviors that we do when we're developing a relationship is we want to behave in a way that's fair. And so we're not just making decisions on a whim. We're acting in a methodical, kind of well thought out way. We want to show confidentiality. And so we want our kids to be able to trust that they can come and talk to us, and we're not going to share the information that they're giving with our friends or their peers or something like that. We want to listen to our kids and assume kind of that active listening posture. So we're making eye contact, we're kind of leaning forward and giving head nods, so we kind of give some of those nonverbal encouragements to keep on talking, keep on going. We're here to listen. And some things we want to avoid when we're working with our kids is some common approaches, like if I'm just easy on our kids, then they're going to like me. If I just give them things, then they're going to like me. That may be effective in developing a relationship in the short term, but we're not going to be effective in our teaching if we do that. We're not going to be able to effectively give consequences or set expectations or limits, and so we want to avoid that. Another approach we occasionally see is when sometimes adults will try to build up their attractiveness by bringing other adults down. You can see that in divorces if one parent tries to play the kid against the other parent and things of that nature. And so, again, that's an approach to avoid. It can breed resentment and other unwanted things of that nature. And then we're going to be teaching skills to our kids, just as I mentioned. And so, in terms of relationship development, that's really a two-way street. And so the way in which we develop relationships with our kids is the way that they are going to develop relationships with others. And so we want to model those relational skills because that's what they're seeing. That's what they're going to use with their friends and essentially, you know, their other family members. So we want to use that pleasant voice tone and accept criticism and refrain from sulking. And we want to teach our kids to give compliments and how to greet people. All of those relational skills, again, we are modeling them for how our kids should be building relationships with others. And I think it's important to remember that good relationships kind of are based off this even exchange of positive reinforcement. And so both parties are getting something out of it. We're getting a lot of social recognition and praise from each other. And then the value of a relationship is a direct function of how much positive reinforcement you're receiving. So again, we don't want every interaction to be corrective or punitive. We really want the bulk of those interactions to be really, really positive. Last couple of slides I'll go over, we're going to talk about some interactional components of developing positive relationships and how you know when you've successfully done it. So some of the interactional components that we can be doing when we're working with our kids is we can be making statements of concern. And so, you know, you may be very well educated and good at working with kids, but our kids don't care how much we know until they know how much we care, right? And so we definitely want to make a lot of statements that we're concerned for our kids and we care about their well-being. When they're going through hardships, we want to express our sympathy, that we understand that what they're going through is difficult. We want to provide them with a lot of encouragement. Always want to be encouraging them, and that's both publicly and privately. So giving lots of compliments, you know, saying nice things. Majority of people like receiving praise. We want to show them with a lot of respect. We want to recognize that they have ideas that may be different than ours. And so at times that we're giving our kids kind of our expectations and we're having some firm conversations, we definitely want to take the time to still hear them too. They may have different perspectives and ideas, and we may end up going with our approach anyway, but we definitely want to take the time to listen to them and not just make them feel like we're the authoritarian and we're not listening to them. We don't view them as intelligent, things like that nature. We want to be flexible. And so there may be multiple ways of getting something done, and maybe our kids have different ideas of how that can be done. We still want to set standards, but we want to be flexible and listening to their ideas and knowing, having their input when we go about setting some of these things. Use of humor is my favorite, super important. I love teasing kids, and I'm big on sarcasm. We just want to choose topics that our kids are confident in if we're going to tease them about it. We don't want to upset them. Make statements of affection and care. We always want to be really, really positive, lots of encouragement. And then last thing is allowing participation. So we really can't, I think, overstate how much our kids want to spend time with us. And particularly here at work, our kids are always looking for opportunities to take breaks with their favorite staff and really strive to get some more of that one-to-one time. And so we love creating jobs for kids that they can help us with, whether that's going and picking up food for the rest of some of our dorms or things. So anytime we can allow our kids to be helpers and come in and kind of be with us and participate with us, they typically really love those things. And then where we'll end today is, how do you know that you've effectively built this relationship? So they may be wanting to communicate with you more. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if our kids are beginning to disclose information to us that they've never shared with other individuals, it's a really good sign that they trust us and we've built a good relationship with them. If they're affected by our feedback, so if we give them some instructions or some guidance to change their behavior and we see them doing that, that shows that they value our opinion and they're affected by our feedback. If you see them imitating you, they want to be kind of a junior version of you, that can be fun. If they're following our instructions and volunteering to help out, talking to us. Lots of kids I work with want to give us things. And so there's times where our kids maybe only have one possession, that's all they have, and they try to give it to us as they're discharging, and we don't take that from them. But that just is a testament, I think, to how much they value some of the relationships that we've built here with some of our kids. If they want to tease us and make fun of us and make jokes, give us compliments. And then the biggest one is proximity, I think. Just seeing the kids want to be by your side and kind of gravitate towards you is a good sign that you've built a good relationship with the kids. I'd like to thank my graduate advisors, Dr. Jan Sheldon and Jim Sherman. I was fortunate enough to get accepted in their program, and much of the information that I share with you today is concepts that they've come up with. None of this is new material, but they're the ones that really taught me the value of relationship development and how important it is to view kind of all work that we do in this field through that lens. So I'm definitely appreciative of their contributions. It seems like we maybe have a few minutes for questions if there's anything we'd like to discuss before we end today.